talking about the ABCs of divorce planning today.
What's the A stand for, Alex?
Something not anger.
I like anger. What do you think, Jan?
Allocation, not anger.
There you go.
Yeah, I think A stands for allocation, because when you're doing some divorce planning, I think you got to start talking about allocation of parenting time, parenting responsibilities. It's good to get some things in place for that issue. So instead of getting angry or working through it in anger at a later time, it's good to plan regarding that allocation.
Yeah. So what's the B stand for? Brinkmeier.
Brainstorming, not backstabbing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good when you talk with your divorce counsel or someone that you want to potentially work with, and you brainstorm. You brainstorm about different ideas and different scenarios of what could, would, or should happen in the event that you're planning something like that.
Okay, Jessica, C. What's the C for?
C is for communication, not cheating.
I like it.
And again, communication. That's something that we promote: communicating with your counsel, communicating with the other side, communicating with other professionals. In your case, there's good communication involved in pre-planning as well.
And communication is actually something that takes a lot of planning in some cases, because figuring out what the best method of communication is in a particular case is going to vary. You know, is it better for the attorneys just to talk? Is it more successful that way? Is it better for the parties to talk, or are there problems that would make it so that they can't, like an order of protection? So something you actually have to think about, and not just, just say communicate.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more people plan now. It used to be, I would see more of people like when they pulled the plug and they want a divorce, it would be like some fight, some kind of thing that would make them mad, and then they'd in a snap, they'll finally snap and they just say, that's it, I'm out. But what I'm seeing now are more kind of plotting with a D, not a T, about what to do. So if they see that there's like what's the word for it? Not a deficiency necessarily, but like the person who works 60 hours a week that wants to have some parenting time with their children, they realize from either all the review that they read about that they need to do something a little bit different if they're going to get some parenting time at the time of the divorce. So I do a lot of that right now. It's just kind of the planning stage for how do we get in kind of the best position to get what we want, in a divorce. So
I think a lot of that is just the amount of information that's available now that, hasn't always been so accessible. There's a lot of resources out there where people, sometimes for good or for bad, there are some really good resources out there that people can look at. But on the flip side, a lot of people rely on their best friend who just got divorced, thinking it'll be the exact situation. And one of the things I find myself reminding people is that every case is different. Your family is different than that person's family. And, these sources can be really helpful, but they also can really set unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of crazy it's kind of crazy if you think about it, how people do just kind of like pull the plug at moments. They may think about it for a long time, but they plan everything else in their lives, from their job to their school and everything is. So it does seem weird that people just snap, and finally pull the plug. But do you do a lot of planning, Jan?
I've seen, like you said, I see a lot of that more and more. And as you described, that triggering event sometimes does lead to somebody just going and filing. And I'm not suggesting that it's just, something that they've not thought about. Maybe it is something they've thought about, but that triggering event, whatever it is, causes them to rush to the courthouse. But what I've seen as well is, even if there's a triggering event, people will call and want to set up a consult and talk about, where do I put myself, or how do I position myself in the best place before I file. So I do see that more and more, and I don't know if people are realizing that it's a good idea to plan beforehand, or like Alex says, many people will say, well, my friends, cousins, aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, hairdresser said, or this happened to my friend's case, and they really think that it's going to follow along suit. And every case, of course, is different.
And you know what happens when people do that? It takes much longer. I know someone, hopefully they're not watching, who has been basically doing their divorce just as somebody else they know did theirs, and it is just not working. It's taking years.
Yeah.
And years off my life and their life.
Well, unfortunately, you know, if there was some sort of cookie cutter, so everyone would kind of know what to expect, but depending on what courthouse you're in, what judge you got, you know, what attorney's on the other side, because there's some attorneys, you know, you can work with and do things that would make sense, frankly, for everybody. And then you get the attorney on the other side who's just, I don't know, playing to a different tune. And nothing can go easily, you know, like you can't even agree on the day of the week. So those types of cases are going to be different.
How does someone plan? I mean, how do you plan? If they call you and say, I want to plan, what do you tell them, Kim?
Yeah, well, it you know, obviously it depends on their circumstances, but for the person who's working a lot and they don't have much time with their children, but they're like, you know, I know if I pull the plug on this and get a divorce that, you know, she's not going to give me any time with my children. You know, I analyze, well, like what kind of time are you spending with your kids now? You know, well, they work 60 hours a week. And when's the last doctor appointment you went to? Well, I don't really have time for that. She does that. When's the last teacher-parent conference you got to? When's the last ball game you got to? When, you know, and if they're not doing any of that, then it can be a suggestion, and, you know, they'll implement it or not, depends on, you know, what they want to do. But, you know, maybe you don't work as much, you know, I mean, it seems bad, you know, as far as your career advancement or something. Some people may not be able to do that, but if you can do that, you know, the court's going to look at where you are when you file. And if you're actively coaching the baseball team now, you know, you're going to have better, I think, temporary parenting orders depending on what you do. Doesn't work every time, but at least you tried.
Well, yeah, that's a factor. The judge looks at the last 24 months as part of a determination of what the status quo has been, and it's something that's considered when a parenting time schedule is set. That's right on, Kim. You know, if they're going to wait a year before they're going to separate, then they're changing the status quo essentially into more along the lines of what they're looking for.
Yeah. And for someone who's at home who doesn't know like what their financial picture is, it's a real good time to like wrap your head around it. You know, like start looking at the mail when it comes in and start asking some questions and, you know what you've got, because a lot of people don't even know, like and it's common in a marriage, I would guess, you know, that, you know, you have your kind of jobs that you do, and, you know, maybe one person's only in charge of paying the bills, so you don't really have a handle on your financial picture. But if you're one of those people, then, and you're looking at a divorce, you might want to start educating yourself so that you know where everything's at, what kind of money is there coming in, what kind of money are you going to need. So that type of thing can work too. You know, maybe you need to go get a job so you can support yourself.
Sure.
You know?
And this is probably a good time, we're skipping over D and E, but F for financial disclosures. There's a statewide form available on the web that it lays out for you what your assets and liabilities are. And it is extremely eye-opening if you're, you know, trying to figure out what your finances are, to do a draft of that form and just see what your needs are. And frankly, any attorney you hire, unless you're just like completely uncontested and you don't have a particular judge in Cook County, you're going to be doing one of those forms. So that can be a good place to start as well. And I've given those to people before when they've hired us to consult with them, you know, before they file. We've worked through those. They're helpful.
It's empowering to know at least financially where you stand, you know, because nothing could be scarier, I think, than someone who's at home with their child and they don't really know how much money there is. So
Sure. That also is a big part of planning, is sometimes people rely on what their spouse says. Well, you know, sometimes you've been fighting for years and years, and the D word of divorce comes up from time to time. And I remember one of my first cases as an attorney ever. Husband made a lot of money, but he told the wife, who had about an 8th grade education and had been a stay-at-home mom the whole entire time, well, if you leave me, I'm going to leave you on the street with the kids. And she came in petrified and was, you know, they've been married like 30 years. And she says, well, I'm going to be on the street. And I'm like, no, you're not. No, you're not. So I would really consider who you're getting your information from. And if it sounds like it's something that's reasonable, sure, maybe that's trustworthy. But the bar is always, is this an equitable solution? Not necessarily equal, but a judge will look that something is rooted in fairness. And in that case, it's simply ridiculous. So if you're getting ridiculous information like that, it's probably time to consult with somebody who's unbiased and has an independent view on these things.
You just did D and E. D for divorce and E for equitable.
Oh, I did. Look at that.
I didn't know we were doing the whole alphabet. Yikes.
I mean,
I didn't mean to. I'm just so alphabet based. What can I say?
I literally was thinking, what are we going to do for X? And I'm like, oh, ex-spouse. We'll just get rid of that E.
Alex.
X.
Here.
What about F for family law courts? What's going on in the courts? Are they still moving and grooving?
They're moving and grooving in some circumstances faster than ever, frankly. I mean, I've never before seen it where judges can enter an order just based upon the pleadings. But shortly before this, I got my first order of protection entered only based upon the petition. No hearing or anything. It
No
was
testimony?
Pretty good petition.
Yeah, I think more and more judges are doing that now, and I've seen it as well. That's why it's very important to have a good set of pleadings, petition, and then when they respond, to make sure that you take the opportunity to file a reply, because the judges don't have to ask for a hearing. They can take it under advisement and rule directly on the pleadings. That's absolutely correct, Alex, and I've seen it now too, and that's something we never saw before.
Right, and also adding a lot more exhibits than you may normally, because in the past you're saying, well, this is potentially hearsay or some other problem with entering as an exhibit, I'll enter it at a hearing. Well, if you're not going to have a hearing, now's your only chance.
Yeah, definitely. You know, and the access to the judges has been a real issue in a good way. But some attorneys were taking advantage of it, and they would like ask the judge to do substantive things via email, but there's an order in Cook County now that says they're not even going to respond to you if you try to put anything in an email that's substantive. So that should be helpful. It's more for attorneys, but.
Yeah, so I guess when we're planning for divorce, it's good to talk about these things with our clients as far as what happens, how fast it can happen, and to make sure they understand that planning right now is appropriate because things can still happen even though we're remote mostly.
Yeah. How has the in-person courthouse been, Jan? A couple of them are open, right?
Well, yeah, I'm appearing in a few courthouses that are open, and it's mainly because there's no elevators. And so there's red X's on the floor and on the seats of where you can sit and stand. That keeps people socially distanced. And everybody, of course, has to wear a mask, court personnel and anybody in the courthouse. And it's also limited to the attorneys only, parties when necessary, and no one else should be attending these court proceedings. But it's a little off-putting. It's a little, I'd rather it be Zoom, since that seems to be working fine right now, and not be exposed, because every time you go out, there's exposure, no matter how careful you are. But it's, I guess I could just say it's okay. Trying a case, for a few hours with a mask on isn't pleasant. Because I guess I read lips. I didn't realize how much I read lips, because sometimes I just can't hear you if your face is covered.
Right. I have the same problem. They're like, what? Somebody was telling me they liked my mask, and finally they just gave up and went,
Oh boy.
Yeah, I'm liking the Zoom hearings myself a lot better than having to go in person. It's just so quick. It gets done quicker, except in some counties.
Right.
But yeah, for the most part, it's quicker.
And
Well,
saving clients money too.
Exactly. I was going to say, if you are, of modest means and have always been considering a divorce and you've been scared that, perhaps it's too expensive, I couldn't afford an attorney, now is really a great time if, you have that concern to consider doing it, because a lot of the services are cheaper. We're not, in most cases anyway, spending, 2-3 hours waiting for a 15-minute status appearance. You have your set designated time and that's it. And, there's not an issue of traveling back and forth, and it's a lot more efficient for the parties.
Yeah, because we used to go to the courthouse for a 9:30, and of course opposing counsel would say, oh, well, I'm running late, and you're 10 o'clock, 10:15, you're still waiting. And the courts always gave about a 45-minute leeway.
Right.
But now when you log in at 9:30 for a Zoom hearing and the other party's not there, it's a risk because it's your time.
Yep.
Well, here's a question. See who wants to answer it. If my husband is planning on a divorce and he files before me, is there any detriment to me being not the first person who brought the case?
Well, I
Does
think
that make sense?
We've done some blogs on that. We've also provided some of that information because that's really a good question. We get a lot. And filing first, it doesn't matter whether you're the petitioner or the respondent. The court doesn't look at either party as being better or more right if they're the petitioner. The only caveat I would say to that is if you're not going to be filing in the same place, let's say one of you lives in Indiana and one of you lives in Illinois, whoever files first win the jurisdictional argument. So the only time it's important to file first is if you're going to have competing jurisdictions.
The other thing I would suggest, at least, is the only other real benefit to filing first is you're not going to be hit with the element of surprise. Sometimes both spouses aren't completely aware that they're about to get divorced. One will be completely surprised by it, and they're a bit wrong-footed if they all of a sudden get hit with a, divorce. I wouldn't say that's necessarily an advantage of filing first, but certainly just whenever anything unexpected comes along, that's always going to be a surprise.
The only other thing I noticed with filing first is that means you're the petitioner, and in the event of a trial, most cases don't go to trial, but in the event of a trial, you go first. You put on your case first, and the respondent puts on their case second. Again, the court doesn't give you any extra credit for that or give you any a boost in credibility because you're the petitioner, but it is noticeable when you get to trial, the petitioner goes first.
The other thing too is that the filing fee sometimes is slightly higher for the petitioner than the respondent, but ultimately if everything ends up coming out of your marital estate, it doesn't matter a whole lot, and we're talking like $100 or $200. And another issue with deciding whether or not to file, it's not really with whether or not you should file first, but just in general of if you should wait or not. If maintenance is an issue and you're the person who's going to be paying, it's better for you to file sooner rather than later. It doesn't matter if you're the petitioner or the respondent, but if the other person's going to sit on their hands, it's better for you to file sooner because it shortens the length of your marriage for maintenance purposes under the statute. Mm-hmm. So, and likewise, if you think you're going to receive maintenance, the longer your marriage, the longer the duration of the maintenance typically under the formula. So you may want to sit on your hands and say, hey, I'm not going to file first. Let's just wait it out.
Same thing if you have a pension. Get that case moving as fast as possible. And in that case, it's not based on the filing date, but of course, the sooner you start, in most cases, the sooner you finish. And if you're going to be receiving part of a pension, you might want to stick around a few more years.
Yeah.
Here's a question. I don't know if it is whoever's writing it quite understands, I think, what we're talking about, but it's how can I brainstorm with someone I can't even talk to? And I think the brainstorming goes on with us, not necessarily the other party.
Right.
Well, if you're planning and you know, and it could be a joint decision between you and your spouse, you know, if this is going to happen maybe next year or something, then let's brainstorm about what's important to us and what do you think would happen and how would you see things. So you could certainly brainstorm with your potential soon-to-be ex-spouse, but if they don't want to talk about it or if they're uncooperative, then you're not going to be doing much brainstorming.
Yeah.
Therein
lies the problem.
Yeah.
But you on your own can brainstorm tons of stuff.
Yes.
And with an attorney. So, you know, and you can often brainstorm ways to communicate with your spouse.
Yes.
This is applicable in a whole sense of ways.
Yeah. And in a lot of these cases where there's no communication, you can't talk to your spouse, you are going to be emailing or using those parenting apps, which I find to be pretty good. You know, our Family Wizard or Talking Parents. And I know there's others out there now that have entered the market, but one of the nice things is if you can't really communicate while like talking to them, at least you can, you know, write, and on those apps, it records everything that not only you say, but when they read it. So that's interesting because some people are like, I don't even know if he, you know, because he never responds, if he even gets it or not. And you can upload like schedules, school schedules, you know, extracurricular schedules, receipts for things that you paid for and you want reimbursement for. So all of those things, the other party can no longer say, you know, well, I didn't get the receipt, so I didn't pay you, which is common, like, oh my God. Or you never told me about the appointment. Yes, it's right here. So that app is real good for people who aren't communicating well either.
I love the tone monitor.
The what?
The tone monitor on our Family Wizard. You can start typing and it reads the tone.
I haven't seen that.
It's new. It's a new feature.
It's like a stoplight. So if what you're typing is pleasant, it'll be lighting up green. And then if you start to get a little bit obnoxious, it'll get yellow. And then if it's like really bad, it's like red, do not send. So
yeah, so as far as planning purposes, I think that's a good point, is this is something else that you could look into. You could look into these different apps and see which one works for your family. Each app does something different. That, along with the financial affidavit as suggested by Jessica, is a really good tool to take a look at. And the other thing, I think Alex mentioned it, is the pensions. I mean, see what kind you have. Are they apples and apples or apples and oranges? How can we compare them? How can we divide them? So these are really important pieces of information. Your tax returns are going to be needed. So you might want to gather tax returns, bank statements, those retirement statements. And like Kim says, if you don't know these things and you never look at them, start opening the mail.
Yep. There's also some benefit to talking to, if you own property and you want to find out if you can refi or if you need someone to co-sign, talking to a mortgage broker can be very helpful as well. Getting an idea of what you would need to get your credit up to and what kind of financing options you have is also really helpful for us.
I think that credit's a great idea, you know, like know what your credit score is, because if you're going to need to go somewhere and either rent or buy, and let's say the house isn't even in your name because you had bad credit, you know, now would be a good time to start repairing it. That's a really good point too.
And
not only the credit score, but you should get a copy of your credit report just to see what's on there. So you know all your debts and liabilities. It's all there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and another potential option is talking to a financial advisor. I mean, you could be one of those people who has been married 30, 40 years, has never had to deal with the finances, and you just have, frankly, no clue as to how to do it. And one of the tools I at least often point people to is, okay, well, you know, you might want to talk to somebody who can really get into how best to manage each and every sort of asset or liability you have. And they can, you know, I mean, we can give limited advice on that, but when you're really talking about like, well, how do I play the stock market? I mean, in that sort of situation, you want to get somebody who really is an expert and designed to give advice in that arena.
Yeah, and that's the beauty, I think, of all of us networking with all the professionals we network with. is we know immigration attorneys, we know financial planners, we know realtors, we know brokers. So there's not going to be anyone that you're going to need that we don't know. So, you know, I know Jan and I belong to this one networking group, and literally we can put a question out there for somebody and we get something back within, you know, minutes, you know, on all these people that, you know, can help you out. And so it's, I think the benefit of also hiring somebody versus trying to do it yourself is that not only are we going to know more about it because we've done it, you know, a million times by now, but we're also going to know a lot more people and network with a lot more people in this area, you know, than most people would do. So always helpful.
Yeah, so we're always open to brainstorm with someone, to talk about allocation, to communicate so that we can help you plan if that's what you want to do. So in honor of our associate joining us today, do you have any closing words, Alex Brinkmeier?
Well, as lawyers, we do often encourage people to be prepared. So if any of you out there think you may be getting divorced soon, please give us a call. I would be happy to talk to you, and I know these other three would be as well.
Thanks for joining us today on Talk Tuesday.
What's up
Thank
next
you for
week? Does
having
anyone
me.
remember?
I think we're talking to Riddy, Johnny next week about immigration law and how it intersects with family law.
Great. That'll be an interesting topic. So
Yeah, please
put your
join.
questions together for immigration for next week.
See you next week.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.